Actually, good health is recording in progress. Fantastic. Good health is very, very important. And it's not just talking about your physical health, but your spiritual health as well. And of course, the two are intertwined. Now, I'd like to ask everybody to turn to Surah Fusilat. That's Surah 41, verse 39. Okay, so Surah 41, verse 39. And we will begin with today's recitation, inshallah. So that's Surah 41, verse 39. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. And of his signs is that you will see the earth still, but when we send down upon it rain, it quivers and it grows. Remember, visualize the Quran. Don't just read it. When Allah is talking about the earth being still and then being the rain coming down upon it and then it's starting to quiver and starting to grow, visualize it. Indeed, he who has given it life is the giver of life to the dead. Indeed, he is over all things competent. ومن آياته أنك ترى الأرض خاشعة إذا أنزلنا عليها الماء فإذا أنزلنا عليها الماء اهتزت وربت إن الذي أحياها لمحيي الموتى إنه على كل شيء قدير. Indeed, those who inject deviation into our verses are not concealed from us. So is he who is cast into the fire better, or he who comes secure on the day of resurrection? Do whatever you will. Indeed, he is seeing of what you do. إن الذين يلحدون في آياتنا لا يخفون علينا أفمن يلقى في النار خير أم من يأتي آمنا يوم القيامة اعملوا ما شئتم إنه بما تعملون بصير. Indeed, those who disbelieve in the message after it has come to them are not hidden from us. And indeed, it is a mighty book. إن الذين كفروا بالذكر لما جاءهم وإنه لكتاب عزيز. Falsehood cannot approach it from before it or from behind it. It is a revelation from a Lord who is wise and praiseworthy. And this is the verse of the day. لا يأتيه الباطل من بين يديه ولا من خلفه تنزيل من حكيم حميد. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات على محمد. So in these verses you can see that Allah is elaborating for us that falsehood can never enter into the Quran, and yet he's telling us that there are certain people who try to inject falsehood, or they try to deviate the meaning of the Quran, right? And Allah is saying these people are not hidden from us. Dear brothers and sisters, we have to be aware that there are people in the community who present themselves as scholars oftentimes, and yet they will cause you to have doubts in the Holy Quran. And therefore, is my sound okay? Somebody said that my sound is gone. It's interrupted, just laggy. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, so how's it now? I've moved an inch to the right. Well, if you have problems, just let me know, and I'll repeat anything that you miss, inshallah. But the point is that there are people in the community who will cause you to doubt about the Holy Quran. All right, and that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. Can you hear me now, or what's it like? Is it still laggy? Yep, it's still laggy, or yep, you can hear me. No sound from me. Oh, yeah, okay. Okay. So you can hear me, but it's laggy. That's an awful shame, isn't it? Let me see what I can do. If you guys can just bear with me for a moment, let me see if I can move somewhere where the signal is better. One second. Better or worse? Is that better or worse? Better. Okay. All right. Well, let me try and crack on, inshallah. Brilliant. All right. That's fantastic. I think the video is a bit worse, but you're going to have to bear with me on that one. So, okay. So there's people in the community who are going to make you doubt in the Holy Quran, and they will use certain facts and twist those facts in order to make you doubt it. Okay. And this is something that you need to be aware of. And that's why in today's session, we're going to be addressing three major points. Firstly, how was the Quran actually compiled after the Holy Prophet? Secondly, what was the role of Imam Ali alayhi salam in preserving the Quran? And thirdly, did Imam Ali alayhi salam have a different Quran? Okay, so this is what we're going to be discussing today. And as I said in the previous session, each one of these points deserves a lecture, if not a lecture series, to elaborate on all of it. But there are some basic points that everybody, as a Muslim and as a lover of the Quran, needs to know. And therefore, we're just going to be touching on these, and I'm going to be giving you those basic points that you should know. All right. So first and foremostly, how was the Quran compiled after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? In the previous session, we talked about wahi, right? We talked about how the message initially came down to the Prophet from the angel Gabriel, or as you know, this pure direct form of communication, or from min wara'il hijab, from behind a hijab or a curtain, like the fire of Prophet Musa. Okay, but when that revelation reached the Prophet, how was it preserved thereafter, and how was it compiled? Okay, and this process went through certain steps. The first step, obviously, was that the Holy Prophet would recite those glorious words. And the revelation, you might know that it took 23 years for the entire revelation to be completed. Now, whenever the Prophet would receive the revelation of God, what would happen is the people around him would hear it and they would memorize it. Okay, so this is the first way that it actually became compiled. Memorization. Why is this so significant? And why is this a strong argument? Because the Arabs were jahil. Yes. They did all sorts of ignorant things. Yes. But their memorization skills were absolutely phenomenal. And how do we know this? Well, because they had you hear about them being poets and reciting all of this poetry. What was that poetry really about? A lot of it was absolutely vain. In today's world, if you want to think about that Jahil poetry, it would have been like pop music of today, right? Where they're just talking about absolute filth, trash. I've got a fly car. I've got this woman and these women, and I've got a wicked, massive house, and blah, blah, blah. It's all dunyawi, right? In those days, that was the kind of poetry that they would also recite. But one of the things they would also do is brag. They would brag massively. And one of the things they would brag about is their ancestors, their forefathers. And they would memorize all of their forefathers, like generations and generations back. Now, if I ask you guys, how many generations back do you really remember? You might say you remember your parents' names, you remember your grandparents' names, maybe even your great grandparents' names. But if you try and go further than that, it's going to be very difficult unless you have a written shajara, which a lot of the sayyids in the community do have. But how many of us have memorized that? Not very many. In Arab culture, particularly pre-Islamic Arab culture, they would memorize all those names going way back. And this is why the argument and the point of the Prophet's lineage is a point of so much contention and discussion in the ahadith, where you can quite easily trace his lineage back all the way to to Hazrat Adnan, for example, because they had brilliant memorization skills. Okay, so this is the first way that they memorized it. The second thing that they did, or the second phase, is they started to write down the noble verses of the Quran. And what they would do is they didn't necessarily have access to paper. Think about how far the Muslims came thereafter. These guys hardly had access to paper, and they would actually write it down on animal skins. Then, when this whole thing was taking place, the third step of that process was that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would actually read the verses of the Quran to his close companions and spend dedicated time doing the tafsir, explaining it to them. And the verse of the Quran uh, actually elaborates on this. It says you, the Quran, this dhikr here in the Quran is actually referring to the Quran. As you know, there's many names as dhikr, right? And so this verse is saying that we sent you this remembrance, this Quran, so that you can explain it to them. Okay. And the Prophet would actually get all his companions together and explain each and every verse to them. We actually have a hadith where one of the companions says that the Prophet would never teach us the next verse in a surah until we had memorized and understood the tafsir of the initial verses, right? Okay, so this is a little bit about how the Quran was compiled after the Holy Prophet. Now we come to the role of Imam Ali alayhi salam in preserving the Quran. Now, Imam Ali alayhi salam's role in preserving the Quran was fundamental. Why? Because the moment that the Prophet left this dunya, is that tafsir available today? No, not in any I'll just quickly answer that question. But what we have is all sorts of hadith
from the likes of Ibn Abbas, who was one of the great companions of the Prophet, and he later on was a great companion and lover of Imam Ali alayhi salam. Ibn Abbas is one of those great personalities who is accepted by both the Sunnis and the Shi'as, and so we have lots of hadith from him concerning the tafsir of the Quran. And so what the Mufassirin usually do is go and look at those hadith and bring them to their tafsir books, depending on what kind of a tafsir they're actually writing. Okay, so after the Holy Prophet left this world, one of the first things that Imam Ali alayhi salam did was he went inside his house. And inside his house, he spent dedicated time compiling the Quran into a book. That book, or these books, is what we would refer to as a mushaf. So the Quran existed in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it was complete and perfected and all the rest of it. What Imam Ali alayhi salam did is he compiled it into a book, right? So you have the Quran, which is that recitation. Remember, in the previous session, we said Quran pretty much literally means the recitation. But was it in a physical book form? Point of contention among the scholars. But the general consensus is that Imam Ali alayhi salam compiled that first mushaf. Now, what happened? That mushaf was rejected by the ruling establishment of the time. Then what happened was lots of the Muslims, those who could read and write and had the time and understood the importance of this matter, they went about writing the Quran, making sure that all the surahs were in it. But there was a major problem. What was that problem? These various mushafs, they differed from each other. How did they differ? Some people, knowing this, learning about this, having a little knowledge about it, will use this information to themselves have, to make themselves have doubts in the Quran. And sometimes when they have doubts about the Quran themselves, they will make you doubt about the Quran. But really, there's nothing to doubt about here. Why? What happened was that in the time of the third Caliph, Uthman, all of those mushafs were brought together and they were burned. All of them were destroyed. And there was one mushaf which had the seal of approval, and that mushaf is the mushaf that we have today. And that's why they still refer to the Quran as the Uthmani mushaf. Okay? So this Quran that we have comes from that time, in the time of Uthman. It is, I have to emphasize this point, it's the same Quran that existed in the time of the Prophet. Nothing was excluded from it and nothing was removed from it. The problem was that in that time, some of the other people who had compiled the Quran, they had left out certain verses. Okay, for example, there was one such mushaf where he had included all of the 112 surahs. Two of the surahs were not included, Surah Nas and Surah Falaq. All right. And when he was asked, why did you leave those out? He said, I didn't realize that that was actually part of the Quran. So this is an example. Now, in order to spare us confusion, those other mushafs were all destroyed. Now, what did Imam Ali alayhi salam himself say about this issue? We have a hadith in this regard where Imam Ali alayhi salam actually was asked about this, about the other mushafs being destroyed. What do you think Imam Ali alayhi salam said? Well, he said, had I been the Khalif, I would have done the same thing. God forbid. Can you imagine right now we have one book, subhanallah, one mushaf. Despite that, the Muslim world is full of this many differences. Wow. Can you imagine if we had had different versions, right, where the surahs were in a different order, for example, or if one of them did not include Surah Nas and Surah Falaq and the other ones did, that would even that would confuse people even more. Alhamdulillah, the right decisions were made, and we have what we have now. Now, we're going to backtrack to that mushaf of Imam Ali alayhi salam, which I'm sure is still on your mind. Why was that mushaf not accepted, and what did that mushaf actually have? Why is it so important, first of all, for me to elaborate on this? Because certain people, it's it's a huge regret for me to actually say this, but some people considered as great scholars in the Shia school of thought, and this is why it concerns you guys more than others, because you won't find these types of scholars very easily among the Sunnis, but you will find them, unfortunately, among the Shias. They will have this perception that this Quran that we have is not the real Quran. Imam Zaman is going to come with the real Quran, and that is the Quran which Imam Ali alayhi salam wrote. This is entirely false, and if anybody tries to say such sentiments, you should know which angle they are coming from. And it's because of these types of people that the likes of Allama Tabatabai and Ayatollah Hui had to spend quite a bit of time and effort refuting these kinds of false ideas within the Shia school of thought. I mean, how sad is that? What was that mushaf though? Well, number one, Imam Ali alayhi salam's mushaf had footnotes, and it had historical context, and underneath the pure and noble verses, which are unchanged and unfathomable and perfect in every way, those were all still there and unchanged, but he had written underneath them what the meaning, the tafsir essentially of these verses are. Secondly, and this is a very important point also, the Mus'haf of Imam Ali alayhi salam had all the surahs in chronological order. What do I mean by that? Dear brothers and sisters, try to engage with this type of knowledge with a superior maturity, right? Because you need to know about these things, and at the same time, they shouldn't make you doubt in the Quran. They should actually enforce your knowledge and your love for the Quran. The Mus'haf that we have right now, the surahs that we have, so it starts with Surah Fatiha, and then it goes to Surah Baqarah, and then it ends with Surah Nas. That is not the way in which the surahs were actually revealed. What was the first verse ever to be revealed? Let me ask you guys. Early pop quiz. Do you guys know what the first verse was? Of course you do. You can message. You can send a comment to let me know if you know it. Who knows what the first verse which was revealed was? Ahsant. Alaq. Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Read in the name of your Lord who has created. That is actually the first verse to be revealed. And so Imam Ali alayhi salam's mushaf actually began with that surah, and it ended with a different surah to what we have today, right? So all the surahs, by the way, are perfect. Like when you start reading Surah Baqarah, you go from verse 1, 2, 3, and all the way to the end. That's all perfect. But the entire surah itself wasn't supposed to be at the second, it's not supposed to be the second surah in the Quran. I don't know. I geek out over these things. I mean, I find it so fascinating. It's amazing because there's a hadith of Imam Ali alayhi salam who said that if the Quran had been read in the order of revelation, no two people would have ever differed about a thing in the entire ummah. Subhanallah. I bet you never heard that, right? Um, but it makes you think. And one of the reasons why I'm telling you about these things, obviously it's a very advanced science. You have to dive into it. It's a sea of knowledge. You have to spend a lot of time researching and looking at all the various opinions before you arrive at any conclusions and all the rest of it. But the reason why I'm sharing this with you now is so that you can appreciate the surahs and understand that when you're reading the Quran, it's no obligation upon you to read the surahs in a certain order, in the order that you have in front of you in the Mus'haf, right? Even the Sunnis don't disagree with this point, by the way. It's not a point of disagreement. And this is one of the reasons why, when you go to the Quran, you'll see that some of the surahs are Makki and some of them are Madani, right? Some of the surahs were revealed in Mecca, some of them were revealed in Medina. And depending on where they were revealed, it's going to impact not only the meaning behind the surah, but the message that you're supposed to take away from it. So you should feel no qualms in reading each surah in whatever order, all right? And the best order that you could read them in is that which is chronological. And you'll have to do a bit of research to find out which surahs were revealed and at which point, right? So if it was Surah Alaq first, then it was Surah, for example, which other surah came next, and then it came next, and then it came next, and you'll find that order. And if you read it in that order, by the way, it's the effects it will have on you are far more profound, undoubtedly. Now, a very quick point before we go to the Q&A session, which I'm sure you guys are burning to ask questions, inshallah, and I sincerely hope that you are, because I've dropped some truth bombs on you today, is this point. The hadith that many of us are very, very familiar with, and we have heard since our childhood, and even those of us who have converted to Shia Islam afterwards have certainly come across the hadith, which says that the Prophet told the people, I am leaving behind two weighty things: the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, itrati, my family, my progeny. Now this begs the question, and this is a question that Allama Tabatabai also raises, and it is this: if the Holy Prophet is saying in his time that I am really leaving behind the Quran for you, why then do so many scholars still insist that the Quran was not compiled until after the demise of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Surely if the Prophet is saying, I'm leaving behind two weighty things, that would indicate that the Quran already existed in the lifetime of the Holy Prophet. There's so many connections in our deen that you really won't arrive at until you really contemplate and start to connect the dots. This is why the Quran keeps on emphasizing, contemplate, think. Don't just follow the scholars. All right? Use your intellect, your God-given intellect, that inner divine prophet, which is within you and will always point you towards the truth. Now, as a final point before we go to the Q&A, because I love that practice of our dear Sayyid, where you end on a point about Imam Mahdi alayhi salam. And people are under this misconception that Imam Mahdi alayhi salam is going to come with a different Quran. This is not the case, all right? Generally speaking, this is not the reality. If you are to stumble across such a hadith, what it's actually alluding to is the idea that the essence of the Quran has been eroded. The essence of the Quran, the meaning of the Quran, the feel of the Quran, that has been neglected. And so what he's going to come and do is re-establish the true meaning of the Quran, the true essence and spirit of the Quran. And of course, that Mus'haf of Imam Ali alayhi salam and other divine books are with Imam Mahdi alayhi salam, and we cannot wait especially those of us who have a scholarly streak within us, for Imam Mahdi alayhi salam to come and give us that knowledge, because it's something that will put an end to years, if not centuries, of contention among the scholarship. And on that point, inshallah, with that point, we're going to go now to the Q&A session. And as I always emphasize, please do ask. If you want to send a message, send the message. And if you would like to say something, then please do put your hand up, and our dear host will let you speak, inshallah. Okay, so Takia Hyder has her hand up, and that's my mum, guys. Just want to point that out. Yep.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa
Sorry, it's not
alaikum
your mum,
salam.
brother.
No, you don't sound like my mum.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, so what's the significance of the way the Quran is ordered as it is? And why was it not in the order that it was revealed? Thank you.
Sorry, what?
What is the significance
Thank you, what?
of the way the Quran is ordered as it is? So why is it ordered like this? And why was it not ordered in the way that it was revealed chronologically?
Yeah, no, really good question, man. So, um, as as far as I've researched, there doesn't seem to be any real reason behind why the surahs are in the order that we have them in today, except that they wanted to put like similar surahs together, to put it a little bit simply. So, for example, you see that Falaq and Nas are together, Surah Duha and Alam Nashrah, they are together. These were seen as similar surahs. They wanted to have the 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 longer surahs at the beginning, shorter surahs at the end. I'm not entirely sure why they wanted to compile it in that way. For me, I'm going to say this even though it might seem a little bit controversial for me to say it. But for me, especially when you're newly coming to the Quran, it feels like almost a hindrance, because you read Surah Fatiha and then you get to Surah Baqarah. And what happens at that point is you're like, this is so long. It's so long, it's not ending. Astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah, but that's how you feel, right? And so it becomes kind of like a barrier or wall for you to get to the other surahs. Now, if you compare that to short surahs, imagine if the Quran had started with the short surahs, it would have a different effect, because you'd feel like you're making so much progress, right? It's like when you pick up a novel or a book when you're a kid, right? And you past chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3, and you're like, oh wow, I'm making so much progress. I'm making so much progress, right? But the way that it's ordered right now, yeah, it does feel like that sometimes. Obviously, we shouldn't feel like that. And when we're in the right mood, that Surah Baqarah will have a profound effect. And, it's got to be your favorite surah when you really get into it. But yeah, sorry, I'm dragging on. But the point is, I don't see any real reason behind that ordering in particular. Okay. Okay, so let me see if somebody else has their hand up. Please ignore any sounds that you can hear in the background. My family has just returned from outside. Okay, so who else has their hand up? Okay, please do put your hand up if you have a question. Meanwhile, I'll go to the comments. Okay. Oops. Salam also, what is the significance of way the Quran is ordered? Good. Yeah. Aren't the ayats of many surahs revealed at different times? I read about many surahs that someone said part of this surah is Mecca and part of it is Medina. Yeah, that might be the case. Good question, Brother Kyle. So basically, what you have to understand is that the surahs that there's, by the way, there's a difference of opinion when it comes to this as well. But from my research and what I have understood, so far is in the order that it was revealed in. Okay, so let's take a surah that you guys are all familiar with and we should be reciting regularly in the month of Ramadan. إِنَّا أَنزَلْنَاهُ فِي لَيْلَةِ الْقَدْرِ وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا لَيْلَةُ الْقَدْرِ لَيْلَةُ الْقَدْرِ خَيْرٌ مِّنْ أَلْفِ شَهْرٍ. So these ayahs would all be revealed chronologically to the Prophet. So first the angel Gabriel, for example, would reveal to him, Inna anzalnahu fi laylatil qadr. Then a few days later, وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا لَيْلَةُ الْقَدْرِ. Then maybe an hour later, the next verse, and then the next verse. And there's actually a hadith to back this up as well, because some of the companions, for example, they would say, we knew when the Prophet was starting a new surah by the Bismillah, because whenever he said Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, then they would know, that's the previous surah has ended and now a new surah is being revealed. Okay, so the order within the surahs is perfect, like that's nothing to worry about. But then the order of the surahs themselves, that's what we're actually discussing here. Okay, I hope that answers your question, inshallah. Also, what about the 7 ahraf of the Quran? Yeah, I'm glad you raised that question. See, this is another point, the 7 ahraf. So this is another thing which not Muslims so much in this case, but non-Muslims who wish to, they will use to say, look, you've got the Quran, which is highly ignorant, and even a little bit of like research, or even, going on to AI like DeepSeek or ChatGPT will quickly answer this question for you. The 7 ahraf, or the 7 modes of recitation existed in the time of the Prophet. Number one, the Prophet could have easily said, no, it's only this one type, or it's only this type which is accepted. No, he said they are all accepted, right? So there are different ways of reciting certain verses of the Quran, and all of them are valid. And I want to give you a kind of an example to help you understand this. It's like, for example, if I'm taking the language of English, right? The standard English language, right? And then I tell you, there's a British accent, there's an English accent, there's a Scottish accent, British accent, there's an American accent, there's a Canadian accent, there's South African accent, and give me one more, an Indian accent, right? And then I tell you that all of these are valid, right? And they all constitute the standardized English, even though they are different. They have different vocalizations, or they have different expressions of the same kind of thing. But one of the beautiful things that you'll find if you go down that rabbit hole is that the different versions, they don't actually change the meaning, in the sense that the only thing you're going to get out of it is even more depth. And I'll spare you giving you an example of that. But yeah, it's just going to give you more depth, which is really fascinating to look into. And this is why, guys, by the way, from these questions and from this session as well, I really hope that you're getting a glimpse into how deep the sciences of the Quran really go, and just how much we have neglected the Quran, because the more you dive into it, and see, the sciences of the Quran are divided into two sciences. There's the ulum of Quran and the tafsir of Quran, right? And both of these are what I'm currently studying at master's level in the Hawza, alhamdulillah. Now, the ulum of Quran, or the science of Quran, that's dealing with the outside of the Quran, right? So what is this book, right? What is this book? How was it compiled? Who wrote it down? And all the rest of it, that external stuff to do with the sciences of the Quran, that in and of itself is beautiful and endless. Then you go to the tafsir, and tafsir is actually going inside the book and discussing what the meanings of those verses really are. This might be why Imam Ali alayhi salam, he said a very beautiful hadith, which I don't want to say wrong. So I'm just going to quickly, I had written it down. No, that's not it. All right. Well, I'll let you know if I dig it up. Here it is. He said, Imam Ali alayhi salam said, Inna al-Quran, surely the Quran, ظاهره أنيق, the outward form of it is beautiful, وباطنه عميق, and the inside of it is deep. عميق, deep. Okay, so yeah, I would really urge everybody to start going into these sciences, because you're only going to increase your knowledge, and it's just fascinating. I hope I'm not the only one to geek out over these things. Okay, so Sister Fatima had, okay, so I had a vocal question. Okay, Bismillah. Sister Fatima
Yes.
Haddad. Okay.
Yes, I wanted to ask regarding the current order of Quran. So we have the idea of istihara. So how does that correlate with the current order not being chronological? I don't know if you heard me.
Okay, I can hear you now. Go ahead.
Yes. So how like the current order of Quran is not chronological. So how does that correlate with the istihara with the Quran and for example, the word that, like, is it good or not good? Like when you do istihara, you have at the top of the page written, like, is that legitimate, and what are general rulings in this regard?
Yeah, it's a very good question. See, one of the things that I'm often emphasizing is to open the book at a random page and just start reading. Read that one verse. It's going to have a message directly for you in the situation that you're facing as of now. That doesn't have, it doesn't change that, because the idea when you are opening the book to a random page for things like istikhara, technically anytime you do that, it's a form of istikhara, right? It doesn't need to be the istikhara where you like, oh, Maulana, like, should I get this person, should I get my daughter married to this person, or should I apply for this job, or should I, it's not necessarily that's from Allah. Generally speaking, is what we refer to as istikhara. Now, the idea here is that you're opening the book to a random page. In other words, it's not in your control. And I think that is the most important thing, that you are leaving things to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to choose for you. So let me put it this way. Even if you did not have the Quran, like the Mus'haf, but you're just scrolling through your phone one day, and some auntie happens to send you some verse of the Quran. We all have those aunties who are sharing those things around in WhatsApp and things like that, right? Or some uncle happens to just say, oh, look at this beautiful recitation, and it just happens to be a verse. Even that, even though you're not getting it from a book, even that is a direct message for you. As I said in the previous session, we don't believe in coincidences as Muslims, actually. And if you contemplate over what the Quran is telling you, it's telling you that Allah created the universe. In fact, everything. وَكُلَّ يَوْمٍ هُوَ فِي شَأْنٍ. The Holy Quran says in Surah Rahman, right? Every day is Him in His sha'n, in His glory and His beauty. Everything that we are witnessing, that we're experiencing, is basically just a manifestation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So no, it doesn't affect your istikhara or anything negatively at all. I hope that answered your question, sister.
Yes, and if I can ask one more short question. So you said that the companions would know when the new surah starts because of the Bismillah, but there is, I think, Surah Tawbah that doesn't start with Bismillah. It
Oh,
was.
yeah, that's a very good point. So I'm getting a bit of feedback. Yeah, with that surah, there's an exception. There's an exception for that surah, and for that surah, it was probably specified afterwards. Remember, the Prophet they didn't just understand it from the Bismillah. Rather, the Prophet would actually explain it to them later on. So yeah, there's a good catch, and that's actually an exception there. Okay, cool. All right, then let me go to one of these written questions, and then I think we're coming to the end of my session. Sayed, I discussed it with him yesterday, and he said it's okay if I spend a little bit more time on these things. So I think it should be okay. How about tadabbur? Why nobody talks about it's really nice. I love it. It helps me a lot. Yeah, people should talk about tadabbur. Yeah, tadabbur, guys, it means contemplation, reflection. Um, and yeah, we should definitely contemplate more over the words of the Quran and the meaning of the Quran. Absolutely. Okay. All right. Well, guys, if you do have any other questions, inshallah, please do send them in the next session. I hope that you've enjoyed today and benefited from it. Um, there was another question which is a little bit outside of the frame of this, and I will leave Sayed to actually handle that. Somebody was asking if they want to start the session not at 11 p.m. home time, but at 10 p.m. home time. Okay, so that will be an hour before we usually start. Now, I was asked to ask you guys if you will be okay with that and if you would prefer that, because some people were saying that they would prefer it. Maybe we could have see a show of hands if people would prefer it to be an hour earlier. Um, if not, you know, we'll. Okay, we've got one thumbs up so far. All right, well, I think we'll only change the time if there's a majority vote on that, because obviously we've finally gotten into the flow of things, and we don't want to change things and make it uh, complicated for anybody. But yeah, if you guys want it an hour earlier, please do let Sayed know. And I'll let you guys go for